Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. She has provided so much insight on something that we can all relate to at some point in our lives, and that is growing older. You may be of a certain age, but maybe your parents are a little bit older, and now that's on your radar, or maybe it's you. It's going to be all of us at some point. We're getting older. When do you make changes in your life? How do you know when it's time to elevate the medical situation? Maybe consider assisted living. We're going to look at that today. She is the founder of the Center for Ageless Living, a wonderful center in New Mexico with so many different programs and insight on aging. And she is back with us. Suzette Lindemuth joins us on the program. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I hope everybody out there is doing well too.
Yeah, wonderful to have you back here. And that is one of those topics that you don't talk a lot about, but it's super important. And knowing when it's time to reach out for help, when it's time to make a change, when you're getting up there in age. What area do you want to start with today?
Well, I think we're just going to talk generally about how important it is to change. I think people are very afraid of change, and there's a lot of fear around aging. And so when you see your situation changing, you're seeing your parents change, that just triggers a lot of fear and anxiety, I think. And I think we have to start to say, change is really important. You need to embrace it. You need to feel positive about it. But I think the best way to feel positive about change is to somehow prepare yourself and to have these discussions with your parents or with your loved ones or even with your husband and even with yourself to say, what is acceptable for me? When do I need to say, I really need help? And for many of us, asking for help is very difficult. I have a very hard time asking for help. I feel like, I should be able to do all this on my own. I feel like, I don't want to burden my neighbors or my friends or my family. So I think we have to have a real honest discussion about, reaching out to others, reaching out to our family, and identifying in ourselves, feel comfortable with as we age.
The first thing comes to mind is driving. Big challenge there when, somebody's older and maybe they're not as capable of driving. And it could be on the other side where you're noticing your parents may need to stop, or it's making their realization, wait, I can't see like I used to. My reflexes aren't the same. That's the first one that comes to my mind, right?
And it's the hardest one to give up. I think once you've given up driving, everything else is easy because it takes away so much of your independence, or people view as their independence. And it is very hard. I mean, I know when my mother-in-law, she had, 2 or 3 minor little accidents and, she's like, I really can't see out of my right eye. I'm like, I think driving is probably just not a good idea. And, we live in a world where we can really access assistance. I mean, there's Ubers, there's taxis, there's friends, there's, situations where you can rely on medical transport for doctor's appointments. So there's a lot of resources out there. And for us, like we set her up with Uber and she could just call Uber. I mean, it was on our credit card. It was easy to do. And she could still go, out to the symphony and do those things. She just didn't have to drive any longer. But it was very, very hard for her to give up those keys to the car. And for many people, you have to rely almost sometimes on the doctor, like writing an order that says, I'm sorry, you can no longer drive. And even though sometimes they still get a driver's license, you can have somebody be the bad guy. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to identify who in your family can be the bad guy to take away those keys. But inevitably, I say, ask your doctor to step in and just write that order and have that discussion that it's just not safe, but make sure that there's that alternative available to them so they don't feel they're going to become homebound. And that's, again, another scary word, oh, no, I'm homebound, I'm stuck, I don't have any resources. So you want to avoid that kind of scenario going through someone's head.
For sure. Thank goodness for Uber and Lyft, because if it wasn't, it would be a taxi, not as accessible. And right there with you, had a family friend who would call me and say, just want to let you know there's another yellow scrape on your mom's car. I'm like, okay, all right. And, shortly thereafter,
Yeah.
fortunately, in my situation, she had some surgery. And she was still like in her upper 80s in the car every single day, going to a
Yeah.
work type situation and all that. But it was at that after the surgery, she actually realized, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be as active in driving as much
Yeah.
or at all. Um, what about when it comes to assisted living? How is that determination made?
Well, I think for many individuals, and it's only been really probably, I would say, in the last 5 years that I've gotten calls from individuals who are saying, I want to know what the resources are. I'm looking for myself. I don't need it today. I want to know how much it's going to cost. I'm preparing myself. So I think that's really good that we're now seeing, people really take that first step. Most cases, it's somebody from the healthcare community or somebody in the family that's saying, I don't feel comfortable with mom or dad, staying alone any longer. And, we've kind of, looked at the resources that are available in her community. Unfortunately, some communities don't have as many resources as others. So that can dictate or drive what the choices are. And then, of course, money, obviously drives that decision quite frequently. And so cost is such a huge issue when it comes to long-term care. So again, thinking about what your financial resources are, but also then thinking about, what can you accept? Can you accept being in a shared room with somebody? Do you have to have a private suite? Do you have to, do you want to be in a high rise? Do you want to be in a residential neighborhood? Do you like, outdoor spaces versus living in the city? So, your community or where you've been living can drive a lot of those decisions. But I think for a lot of people, it's really, if you're needing assistance at night or you're noticing that there's safety issues or that there's memory issues that are impacting day-to-day living. So for families, it's often, are they eating? Are they leaving the stove on? Are they leaving water on? Some of those daily things that start to trigger concerns. Now, we're not talking about every once in a while when somebody leaves a stove on. I mean, even I have left my stove on. I mean, I'll admit that. I don't think I'm right there where we're assisted living, but maybe getting close. So, I think you have to put it in perspective. So, I think we're not talking about just occasional kind of mishaps. But, when it becomes a pattern or, particularly eating, I think eating is one of those things that if you notice that mom or dad just are not eating, you're leaving meals for them, you have everything labeled and, they can still use the microwave, but they're not doing that. I think that that's probably the number one scary thing, because if you stop eating, that affects everything from, memory loss to infections to a whole host of other things. And so I think that's where you have to really say, mom, or dad, you're just not eating well. What can we do? And if that means, going over there, having somebody go over there, eat with them, because eating is such a social activity and it's so important to be around people when you're eating. It's very hard to eat alone. I think everybody will say, oh, I don't like to eat alone. And I think that's why we have such, great restaurants. And when you live in a neighborhood where you can walk to restaurants, it's nice to go out to eat when you're by yourself, because that's a social event and you're with people and it makes it more fun. But again, it's hard to cook for one person. We even sent, my mother-in-law was actually a trained chef, and she taught cooking classes in the Dallas, Fort Worth area. And she was a fabulous cook. And so when she stopped eating, we were all like, oh, it's good. So one of her students who has a restaurant started sending her over meals. And so that was kind of a nice, thing for her, was because, the students sent her food and would stop in and make sure she was eating. And at some point, that wasn't an option either. It worked for a while, and all things will work for a while, and then maybe they just don't work any longer and they fall apart. And that's when I think if the puzzle becomes too complicated to put together all those pieces in your own home, that's when programs can become such a great asset. Assisted living typically is all inclusive: meals, laundry, support services, help with all the activities of daily living, recreational activities. So it's all inclusive, and it makes it easier for the individual to feel part of a community very quickly. And then it also gives peace of mind to the family, who maybe doesn't live right down the street any longer and is wanting to make sure that their mom or their dad or their aunt or uncle are surrounded by supportive services and people that they can trust to make sure that they're, doing what they say they're doing. And I think, we have wonderful non-medical homemaker services too. And I think every agency, and I'm sure it's not just New Mexico, but across the United States, is suffering from staff shortages in this area. And, we know that this is going to be a huge issue as the population ages and we don't have a young enough workforce coming in to do that direct care. And although I'd like to think that, someday there'll be robots roaming around helping us, I doubt that we're going to be able to rely on that technology for this kind of hands-on personal care that people are going to need no matter where you live. And so it is a dilemma across the United States to find dependable and reliable people to go into the home. And the problem, again, with non-medical homemaker services is that even though you have one person going into the home, is that enough to reduce isolation? And that is the mission of the Center for Ageless Living, to reduce the isolation of aging. And we recognize that can't always be done, individually in everyone's home. But we certainly want to make sure that people are traveling through the journey and, starting with services in their own home and then maybe moving into assisted living. So it's an option for people, and we want to make sure people know that in your neighborhood, assisted living is across the United States now. I think there's very few areas that don't have that service.
Do you feel, Suzette, that one of the cornerstones of the Center for Ageless Living was community within? When you were founding, this center, was it to remove isolation, encourage, foster those relationships among the people that are living there, but also even, among the staff?
Absolutely. I mean, we've worked really hard at trying to establish that. And, across my career, I've been in business 38 years. I've seen lots of changes. And before I started this, I worked in nursing homes. When I was 18, I worked in a nursing home in Pennsylvania. I worked in a nursing home in Fort Collins, Colorado. So I've been in the nursing home industry, and I know how difficult that environment was for me, and it made me feel not part of a community. Actually, I felt that it was a way to isolate people, not to bring people into a really supportive environment. Now, the nursing home industry has had very many movements over the years, and they certainly have tried to go more into person-centered care plans and working with community people to improve how the nursing home industry works. But the environment is so different in assisted living, and I think we strove for that as an industry to make sure that it was a feeling of community and home. And when it started, in the early 90s, I think everybody recognized that we had to become more community and home-based feeling for individuals that were aging, that it was important that we have this non-medical model, social model program that really concentrated on someone's own quality of life more than the medical aspect of living. So I was happy to join the industry at a young age and continue to feel committed to making the environment pleasant, making the community evolve, bringing resources to individuals that don't always have the ability to do that. So as a team, we have a huge team here at the center that we continue to work hard at making those opportunities available for our elders, their family, and our staff.
Every time we've talked, and even if you talked about the bistro or the different programs that you have, I get a warm and fuzzy feeling. It's just when you talk about the staff and how everybody's so committed and so connected with the people that live there, you can feel it. Got to tell you, I've got to be honest, Suzette. Every time we talk, I feel like I know your staff. And I've never been to the center, but I feel like I have, based on what you've described and also the relationships that the people who work there have with the people who live there.
And I encourage people to go to our website, nmagelessliving.com. We have some really beautiful videos on the center. We also have a YouTube channel, Center for Ageless Living. You can go to the YouTube and see lots of videos that we've created over the years about our recycling program, our, the home feeling that we created, our spa, our bistro. So all that's available online, and we encourage you to visit that website. But also, if you're in New Mexico, come by. I think the model that we strive for here is somewhat unique. I don't know that there's a lot of programs across the United States that have embraced such a unique model about bringing retail and aging services together under one campus. I think there's been some unique opportunities for individuals to look at that. I think they've called on in some places, but I think it's a challenge to take away that fear model of aging and bring it to a holistic family community model. I think there's still a lot of fear around aging.
Yeah.
It's not contagious. You're not going to catch it. You already have it.
We all do. And when you look at these two words, and we've heard them for decades, growing up, all of this, nursing home. It presents a picture in our minds. There's nothing wrong with that picture, but it's the vibe that you get from that. But, yesterday's nursing homes aren't today's assisted living centers, right?
Right. That's right. And even the nursing homes aren't the same because, you're right.
Yes.
I mean, because we're still in that generation that grew up feeling like, whatever you do, don't put me in a nursing home. Like, they're holding on to your arm. Don't put me in a and it's so sad. And you're just like, listen, there's no way that families can do this on their own any longer. It's so complicated.
Yeah. And
families are working and, the sandwich generation is true. And, there's all these things that are putting pressure on the system. And so when mom and dad or, whoever is holding onto your arm and saying, whatever you do, I'd rather be dead. Don't put me in there. You just have to kind of comfort them and say, listen, we would never put you someplace that I wouldn't go to. If I'm not going to live there, I wouldn't put you there. And, we're not going to put you anywhere. We're going to come and join your life. We're going to be part of a community. And I think that those are scary words for anybody to hear. And
Yeah.
I think our generation of elders that are now 80 and 90 still have that concept in their head. And so I always tell families, whatever you do not promise that you can't, don't say something you can't keep a promise. Don't say that, because the reality is that it's very difficult for us to do things alone. We have to have community around us, family around us, support. So I always tell families, whatever you do, don't say that. Just,
I'm getting my kids.
That conversation.
I'm working on my kids already. Like, guys, be prepared.
Yeah.
You're going to be taking care of dad. But it's another word or description came in: nursing homes, but old folks home. I remember that one as a kid, and it's that thought, that feeling that somebody's going to be institutionalized, kind of But this is so far from what it used to be back in the day. What would you say that when you're making the determination that it's time to make some changes as somebody's getting older, and certainly for the family to intervene, whether it's driving, whether it's assisted living, changes in medical, would you say by and large, when you know?
I think that's true of almost all changes in our lives, that there just comes a point when we know that the options that we were utilizing before are no longer working. The situation is not ideal. We're exhausted, or that there's just parts of the puzzle that don't fit anymore. So I think you do know when you know, but I think for elders, they really need to have family or somebody come in and help them with that decision. I think it's still very rare for an elder person to say, oh, I'm gonna go out my house and go to assisted living. Now, some of them say that, but most of them do not say that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we just have to really encourage people to recognize that the journey is part of a process that families have to be involved in. And I encourage families to start the talk before you have to go into those types of programs, or you need resources, or you need services, because there is some planning. And we know we talk about planning a lot, and people just put it off, and then something catastrophic usually happens, a fall or an illness or injury. And then you're forced to make those decisions and change very fast. And if you don't already have sort of a model in your head about what that's going to look like, it can be very challenging and very difficult. So I think families just have to start talking about it. I think our generation, who still have parents and our older children is to continue to have the talk about, what's going to feel comfortable when we're aging. Some of us can go and live with our families. Some of us cannot. And then, looking at financial planning is critical because, again, resources can be slim. We don't know what's going to happen. Well, we don't know what's going to happen on the political front with all the changes that might come down the road. But we do know that, there are supports within communities for individuals that are low income and need assistance. But I would encourage everybody at a young age to start to think about, what are the resources in your community? What resources do you have? And what are you comfortable with? That's really, really key. Some people are just not comfortable. They have to be in the Hyatt. They would never stay at, Motel 6. Okay, if that's true, then that's where you have to be. Then that's what you have to think about.
But budget is also a consideration. So yeah, hey, put me in that Hyatt, but if I can't afford it, I'm going to downgrade a little bit. You have so many wonderful things going on at the center. Tell us about one program, whether it's pre-existing or something that's coming up or just something that's maybe even fairly new, whatever, that you're loving right now. I'm sure you have favorite programs from time to time. Share one with us.
Well, things have changed so much, and I don't want to blame COVID on change, but I think I will. I mean, prior to COVID, it was a different world for us. But we used to do a very special event called Field to Food. And because we had sustainable gardens and organic gardens here at the center, and we still support our local farmers and the restaurant, but it was a fundraiser for our low-income elders, but also to bring recognition to the center. It was a meal that was prepared by the staff at the bistro. It featured all local ingredients from within 100 miles radius of the center. And, we used to have about 125 to 130 people come to the park. We had a huge tent. And we sat under the stars at night and shared a community meal. We always featured our local farmer or our local vendor that was creating something here in Valencia County. It brought families together. It brought our neighbors together. It was really a wonderful event. And we held it for, maybe 10, 15 years. I mean, it was a really lovely event. And of course, we stopped when COVID occurred. We have not brought that back, but it is something that people have asked about. And I continue to think, we'll, next summer, maybe we'll do it next summer. But, there are other things that are happening. We do have a fabulous music series here in the summer every August. On Saturdays, we have music in the park and we do a big barbecue. It's open to all of our elders who live here on the campus, our staff, and then we open it up to the general community to come and listen to music in the park. And we've continued that. That has come back after COVID, and that's a wonderful summer event that we do, and we really enjoy that a lot.
So wonderful. Sign me up for that dinner. That sounds so fantastic. You go out to eat anyway. Imagine going out to eat, knowing that it's sourced locally and maybe even very locally there at the center. It's one of the vegetables that is grown there, or maybe all of them. And just knowing that it supports, the money that you pay for your dinner actually goes to a wonderful cause. And certainly the music is universal. Good stuff you're doing there. It's, what I love? The fact that it's so hands-on. When you look at a lot of assisted living centers, or at least that's my perception, around the country, it's very corporate. It's very rigid. This is just like I said earlier, warm and fuzzy. You get a warm and fuzzy feel from what you're doing there.
Well, I'm so glad that you respond that way. We love what we do here. We're very passionate about what we do here. I can't thank my staff enough for all their commitment to what they do here. And we continue to, I always say, we just continue to plug along. We're here. We're just going to continue to grow and change. And as things change in our lives, then we change too. So we love that aspect of aging.
Fantastic. Please share the website. Somebody wants to check out some of the videos and some of the content you have there. It's really, really good stuff. How do we find it?
nmagelessliving.com. And you can email me, Suzette, Suzette, @nmagelessliving.com. And again, feel free to always contact us and come by if you're in the New Mexico area.
Suzette, thank you so much for being here today and just the insight on whether you're in New Mexico, whether you're ready for assisted living. We all got to deal with it. It's coming around the corner for all of us, that being that thing called age. Appreciate you being here. And I know you're going to be away for a couple of weeks. Have a fantastic getaway.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.